can I present this award in memory of the great Lord Avebury.
Thank you all very much for inviting me to speak on behalf of my father, who died last month. I'm sure he would be very embarrassed at how much everybody appreciated his lifelong commitment. So very briefly, I'd just like to say that Eric was one of a rare breed of politicians who never took the privilege of power lightly. He was determined to use his position to improve the lives of anyone suffering persecution at home or abroad. As the chair of the Parliamentary Human Rights Group from 1976 and vice chair from 1997, he visited dozens of countries to report on human rights violations which were not being given any attention in the West. I've been amazed at the different people who expressed their condolences to my family since Eric died, as he worked very quietly on very unpopular causes with no fanfare and usually very little immediate success. Looking at one of his reports on the Kurdish region of Turkey in the early 90s, there is a section about killings by the army in Cizre, a city which even now is subject to brutal state repression. Things have a tendency to repeat themselves in Turkey because the state has always refused to deal with its appalling legacy, built out of the bones of ethnic minorities, not just Kurdish, but Armenian and Assyrian and Pontic Greek, who are ethnically cleansed to make way for an ethnically homogenous Turkic nation. Eric was a great admirer of Gladstone, the 19th century Liberal Prime Minister. One of Gladstone's last speeches was on the Hamidian massacres of the Armenians in 1896, and I imagine that had an influence on his support for the recognition of the Armenian genocide and in pressuring the Turkish government to treat its minorities with more respect. It seemed that things were getting better in the mid-2000s with the AKP's more tolerant attitude to ethnic minorities, having themselves had their religious identity repressed by the state. Sadly, the more Erdogan has accrued all authority to himself, the more he has jettisoned his progressive promises and fallen back on the easy and brutal tool of nationalism to quell dissent. It was because of my father's influence that I became a human rights activist, particularly concentrating on the Gulf Sheikdoms and Turkey, and ended up making a film last year about the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. When Eric was allowed to go back to Turkey, he was banned from Turkey for 10 years between 1995 and 2005. One of the first things that he did was to go with his friend and colleague Aras Sarafian, who is here, to publish the Blue Book, the records of witness testimonies on the 1915 massacres for the first time in Turkish. My father was an establishment rebel, and as such he got away with being a constant thorn in the side of numerous governments. I know he looked with disappointment on the backsliding of the Turkish government in its treatment of Kurds, but he would not despair. He would see it as just another opportunity to disrupt the plans of autocrats, to help give a voice to the dispossessed, and renew his commitment to building a world that was better than the one he was born into. I hope he inspired you all as much as he did me. Spas.